CJ Stroud had a great rookie season. I'd go as far as to say it was probably the third best of all time, behind only Robert Griffin III's rookie year and Justin Herbert's as well. With that said, the NFL is stacked at quarterback, so this is probably going to get me assassinated in the comments, but he ended up ranking as my 15th best quarterback for me. He had a fair bit of luck with turnover-worthy plays not being converted to interceptions, and he had a top 10 supporting cast according to PFF grades of his offensive line and receivers, so that uplifted him somewhat as well. In the end, Stroud ranked tied for 11th in expected points added and 15th in quarterback rating, so he was very good statistically. I just hold him back a little bit because the receiver play was fantastic with Nico Collins and Tank Dell in particular, Dalton Schultz also being a good contributor. We'll get into all of them more as we progress throughout the video, but they were great, and that really helped the situation of Stroud to put up the gaudy numbers he did. So as a whole, I think he's being a little bit overvalued. I think he has the chance to be a bona fide top 10 quarterback this year, but I just don't think he was this past season. At backup quarterback, Houston is pretty well set. Davis Mills wasn't good this year, but he has played at a solid backup level for his other 2 years, so he is a reliable enough backup. He's been an okay starter. You definitely don't want him starting for your team, but he's been okay in that role, so he can play some games if need be. As we move to the supporting cast, if you're enjoying this video, make sure you give it a like and also subscribe, as both make massive differences. With that out of the way though, the offensive line gets a really bad reputation, and I don't think it's actually justified. I think it's mainly a situation where the offensive line had 7 starters get 200 or more snaps throughout the season, which 200 isn't the biggest number. The average offensive lineman that starts is going to get you around 1,200 or so snaps if they play the entire season. So that's 1/6 of the season they played, at least. But with that said, there were 7 guys that really got time, so they didn't have the greatest cohesion, and that ultimately held them back from where they could have been. But still, looking at their PFF rankings for pass protection in conjunction with ESPN's win rates for pass blocking, combine those together, they were 15th in rank out of the 32 teams in the NFL. That's not bad. That's slightly better than average, obviously. So they didn't struggle very much in pass protection, even with the injuries. They did struggle, however, in run blocking, though. That was definitely pronounced because, again, with that sort of mutt of a stat where you combine PFF's rankings with ESPN's win rates, then we see that the Texans were 23rd in run blocking, so they did struggle in that regard. Overall, though they were banged up, I don't think there's any reason to expect them to be vastly different from last year's ranking, as 4 of their 5 starters got serious play last year. So they did build some chemistry together, and that matters a lot because just second to overall talent is chemistry, I would say, for the offensive line, where playing together does matter a lot, and just knowing how each player is going to react in any given situation is very valuable. So with that said, I think the Texans should be better off this year. Not necessarily vastly differently, but enough to notice because hopefully they won't have as many injuries as well, so they can build that cohesion even better. Laramie Tunsil, he remains an elite tackle that helps make the entire unit succeed, but ultimately their success will come down to Titus Howard, who struggled mightily last year as a guard when he's been a solid offensive tackle in years past. So he's going to be the real make or break for this team. Also, Blake Fisher. If Fisher gets play at tackle, he could be that player. If Howard struggles, they drafted Fisher as a sort of contingency plan. They drafted him in the second out of Notre Dame, which Notre Dame, factory for offensive linemen that are good. So you can feel pretty safe in that, even with him being a second rounder. But with that said, they'll be okay if they face some injuries. They do have depth. As I mentioned before, Fisher was drafted in the second, and second round tackles usually are okay, having an average PFF grade of 55 since 2019, which would be good for 68th out of 89 tackles. So you don't want him starting, but if he comes in relief of somebody, you could do far worse. Juice Scruggs is also alright as a backup on the interior, so they do have options should somebody go down, which hopefully is not the case this year. Hopefully they can actually be healthy. Shifting to the weapons now, this is the real selling point for the Texans in my opinion, as this might be the best group in all of football for weapons. We have Nico Collins, who had an elite year in 2023, finishing 7th in yards per game and 7th in yards per reception too. He is an absolute mismatch, being 6'4" and having great speed and physicality too. I think he is as advertised statistically, which isn't always the case. There are some players that they have stats and you kind of wonder how they got them, but Nico Collins being 7th in yards per game and 7th in yards per reception sounds perfectly in line with his play, to me at least, as he is a very good deep threat. He puts that 6'4" frame to good use. He's also just super athletic, so he can burn you as well. But even if he doesn't, he can just moss you with his 6'4" frame. He's 215 pounds too, so good luck getting out of the way. Or good luck with him. He's going to push you out the way, I should say. So Collins is just a total beast. And then their number 2 is... Well, let me finish with Collins. He's 7th in yards per game as well, which shows that he is able to do more than just be a deep threat. There are some players that are just put on this earth to run deep and be a threat that way, be a field stretcher. Collins is more than that. He can do that, but he can also win in the short to intermediate part of the field just fine. He's improved tremendously as a route runner in his time in the pros. He was not good at that when he entered the league. He was a lot stiffer than he is now, and he just is a totally different player than when he entered the league. So major props to him for turning it around. I believe he was a 3rd round pick. He always had the talent to be fantastic. Yes, he was a 3rd round pick, but he just wasn't putting it together, and good on CJ Stroud too for getting the most out of him. They work in conjunction with each other. It's not one or the other doing all of the work. They work in unison. And then moving to their second option now, Stephon Diggs, he had another great year in Buffalo. He ranked 17th in yards per game and a respectable, not great though, 67th in yards per reception. That again sounds about right to me. I wouldn't have guessed that he would be all the way down at 67th for yards per reception, but I also don't see him win deep downfield very much anymore, so I can kind of see that. He's still fine as a wide receiver 1, But man, does he have a fantastic role as a wide receiver too, if he won't be pouty about it and complain about not getting enough targets, which isn't a guarantee. He has had his disputes throughout the years. But man, Diggs is still really, really good. He is mainly getting it done in the short to intermediate parts of the field at this point, but he still gets it done. And there is a lot of value in being a chain mover. Yes, in an ideal world, you just drop 80-yard bombs on the defender's head every play, but that's not very realistic. You need to be able to do a variety of things to really get the defense off their game. So Diggs is helpful in that, because if you want Collins to go deep, he can do that, and he'll open up the field for Diggs shorter, and that's just a beautiful thing. That's really disastrous if you're a defensive coordinator, though, because good luck covering everybody. And when I say everybody, I also mean Tank Dell, who really burst onto the scene in 2023. He finished 24th in yards per game and 20th in yards per reception. To put it frankly, he's an absolute stud. And if he ends up being a wide receiver 3 for Houston, he'll likely be the best wide receiver 3 in the league. I don't know if I'm missing somebody glaring, but I'm talking a true wide receiver, not, Travis Kelce is the number 1 for Kansas City, and Rashee Rice is the number 2, and yada, yada, yada. I mean, strictly for a wide receiver, Tank Dell is probably the best wide receiver 3 in the league. It's going to be a tough competition between Diggs and Dell, to be honest. I think Collins is pretty clearly the one, but then Dell and Diggs are going to be vying for the number 2 spot. Dalton Schultz is kind of left unentertained in most people's mind, but he is also tremendously good. He ranked 10th in yards per game among tight ends and 7th in yards per reception among tight ends. So he's a fantastic player. He just doesn't get talked about very much in the conversations of great tight ends, which I don't really understand. He's been good for a while now, even going back to his Dallas days. Maybe he can only play in Texas, but that's a fine way to be. Moving to running back, things slow down a lot because Joe Mixon is a mid running back. He is not inspirational whatsoever. He ranked 33 out of 59 in running backs in PFF grade. I guess a little bit inspirational is that he was 15th out of all running backs in receiving grade, so he does have that going for him. He can be a receiving threat. Overall, though, I'm not really too jazzed about him being the running back. I think he's just okay, and he is definitely slowing down at this part of his career. Overall, Houston has some superstar talent, and then they have great depth, too, with John Mechie having a ton of talent for a wide receiver 4, and Brevin Jordan is a great backup tight end. They might have a solid second and third option at running back, too, with Dameon Pierce, who struggled this past season, but was good the year before, and Cam Akers, who has torn both Achilles, which has seemed to balance him out as he was playing with better juice now than after his first tear, seemingly. So maybe that's just the secret. You got to tear both Achilles if you're going to tear one. Lastly, they have a third tight end in Cade Stover, who they drafted in the 4th, who might contribute as well. So they're really well insulated for injuries. Moving to the defense now. At cornerback, the Texans have a superstar, and then possibly some solid pieces around him as well. The superstar, if you didn't know, you should know. I shouldn't say that. Maybe you're new to football. But the superstar is Derek Stingley. He ranked 9th out of 127 in PFF grade. He's extremely good in coverage, both man and zone. He uses his 6-foot frame and awesome athleticism to interrupt passes, but he's just whatever against the run, which is perfectly fine. If you're going to be great at coverage and be even bad as a run defender for a cornerback, that's fine. Obviously, it's better to be good at both aspects, but the more valuable portion by far is the coverage aspect. And Stingley has that unlock. He's also just a great interceptor of the ball. I honestly don't know how many interceptions he has at this point in his career. I just don't really track interceptions because they're very fluky year to year. But he has some of the best ball skills you'll ever see for a defensive back. He attacks the ball like a wide receiver trying to catch a pass. And it's honestly sensational to watch. If you haven't, just look up Derek Stingley highlights and you'll see him attack the ball like a just complete animal. He has no regard for other human life. He just goes after that ball with reckless abandon. The next piece for them is really going to make or break the room, in my opinion, Kamari Lassiter. He was a second-round pick this year. Second-round corners usually are solid, having a 60 PFF grade since 2019 in their rookie year, which would be good for 86th out of 133 corners. Moreover, Lassiter was rather refined, just lacking a bit in athleticism, so he might be able to exceed those expectations. He might not, though, so there is definitely some worries. If he's average for a rookie second rounder, the unit's going to be fine. I really think so. If he's above average, it could be one of the best in the league. And if he's below average, it's going to be a bit dicey. So I think he's really essential to this whole thing. Someone else that does matter a lot, but I have faith in for being good, is Miles Bryant, who was 54th out of 127 corners. Overall, it seems Lassiter is going to make or break the unit, like I said, as he could be a weak link and possibly cause the rest of the group to not look as good because he's going to get targeted, or he could show why he was drafted so highly in the first place. And then the group is really going to be difficult to go against. And a portion of why they're going to be so difficult to go against is because the safety portion is pretty well set as well. Jimmy Ward finished 37th out of 95 safeties, being good against the run and pass, and doing so in the nickel, box, and free safety for all 100 plus snaps or more in each. I should not have to say or more, I said plus. So you get the idea. He played a lot of snaps at a bunch of different positions, and he was really good at that play. Jalen Petrie was alright, ranking 67th out of 95 safeties. It's hard to say what he's going to be because on the depth chart I saw, they had him listed as the nickelback ahead of Miles Bryant, which I don't really understand. I think Miles Bryant is a clear-cut starter at nickel, and I think Petrie is fine enough as a safety, so it's going to be interesting to see how they play. But that is something to keep in the back of your mind. Petrie might be their nickel. I don't really think that'll be the case, but I'm not certain. I know less than the people making the depth charts, I'll admit. For depth at defensive back, the Texans have Jeff Okudah, who was really tragically rated as 113th out of 127 by PFF, and he has struggled quite a bit in other years too. But he was drafted third overall for a reason, so maybe he turns things around. I really wouldn't bank on it because he's been in the league long enough at this point. But who knows? At safety, Kalen Bullock is also something, as he was drafted in the third, where safeties have 59 PFF grades in their first year, which would equate to ranking 78th out of 101 safeties. So not bad. That's all well and good for their depth. I don't trust Okudah, but I do think Bullock could be something. On the defensive line, the Texans are ferocious, which just really reaffirms how good this team is. They got a good secondary, and then their defensive line doesn't slow down any. Danielle Hunter finished 9th out of 122 in edge pressures, though he struggled mightily against the run this year, which is kind of weird. He's been a good run defender in years past, so maybe he was just putting all of his energy into the pass rushing aspect. I don't know. I think DeMeco Ryans could get him back to being a solid run defender, and that would go a long way, because if you can run on this team, that's going to really mess with the flow of things, and that would make for one clear weakness that you just don't want to have. Will Anderson, their opposite edge, also had a great year, ranking 22nd in edge pressures. He's great against the run, so even if Hunter does struggle, they're not going to be bad holistically on the edge or setting the edge. But, man, it would be nice if Hunter could also be good against the run. On the interior, Mario Edwards was really good. He finished 53rd out of 142 in defensive interior pressures, and he's a good run defender, so he's a nice piece to have. Lorenzo Fatukasi is more of a run defender than he is a pass rusher, finishing 47th out of 137 defensive interior in PFF run defense grade, but he's all right at getting after the quarterback too, ranking 77th out of all defensive interior in pressures. For their depth, they have a serious amount of depth as well. Derek Barnett really turned his career around as well, has turned into a fantastic player in his role as a third edge rusher. He is really one of the premier third guys, I would say, in this league. Danico Autry, he can give good reps as well, and Khalil Davis is a solid interior player as well. If it wasn't clear, this defensive line is for real, and they don't take their foot off the gas, because everybody can give 100% and then be subbed out for somebody else that can give 100%. For their final positional group, linebacker, the Texans are remarkably consistent there. Christian Harris ranked 49th out of 82 linebackers in PFF grade, being very good in coverage and the pass rush, but poor against the run, which doesn't fly quite as much as it does for a corner, but if you're going to be good at defending the pass and bad against the run, that's a fine enough balancing of skills. So I don't hate it for Christian Harris. I think he's a solid player. He won't play early on in the season as he's on the injured reserve, but he should return partway through the year, and then the linebacking core should look pretty solid, because Azeez Al-Shaair was 50th. Again, remember, Christian Harris was 49th, so they have the 49th and 50th ranked linebackers in PFF grades. He's the inverse of Harris as a great run defender and somebody who's all right in coverage, so I love the balance they strike there. They cover each other's weaknesses perfectly and just make for a really good modern linebacking core. As for the depth, they have none of that at linebacker, so they're going to need their guys to stay healthy if they want to be good at linebacker. In all, the Texans are a major threat in the stacked AFC. CJ Stroud has been very good to start his career. His weapons are up there with anyone's. His line isn't bad. Then defensively, there's a lot to like as well. They're extremely well coached with DeMeco Ryans having minimal weak links on defense, as their linebackers are good. They also have a great edge rushing duo in Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter, alongside multiple other pass rushers. They then have elite talent on the back end as well, with Derek Stingley being a top corner, Jimmy Ward being a high-end safety, Miles Bryant being good in the nickel, and Kamari Lassiter being a possible contributor as well. They're going to need Lassiter or Okuda to step up as their second corner, but that's about it for their worries, so they are a really well-established team. Those are my thoughts. Be Be sure to let me know what yours are in the comment section, and also be sure to like and subscribe for more content.